There will be a substantial reward for the one who finds the Millennium Falcon. You are free to use any methods necessary, but I want them alive. No disintegrations.
As you wish. What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
The Empire will compensate you if he dies. Put him in.
The most famous part of Anakin and Boba Fett's relationship is this iconic scene. But how did we get here? Their history goes way back before that, and it follows some very interesting but often overlooked connections, story-wise and also thematically. They mirror each other in so many ways that it's impossible to fully understand one without the other, even though the detail is easily missed. So let's take a look at the history of Anakin and Boba Fett, and how their destinies thematically intertwine to become one of the greatest surprises of Star Wars, shaping a story and a galaxy. I'm going to show how these two mirror each other through their stories, how that affects the themes of Star Wars, and take a look at behind-the-scenes reasons for all of it. So get in your ship and get ready for takeoff, because this is the deep dive. Once you start noticing the similarities between Anakin Skywalker and Boba Fett, it never seems to end. It all starts with their childhoods. In the prequel films, Anakin is by far the main child featured, but Boba Fett is a close second. While young Anakin gets a full 23 minutes of screen time and young Boba only gets 2 minutes, they are by far the most prominent kids of the original movies. And Boba's impact in that 2 minutes hits hard in a memorable way. In real life, the actor of Boba Fett, Daniel Logan, was 15 years old, and the actor of Anakin, Jake Lloyd, was 10. But the characters of Boba Fett and Anakin were canonically only 10 and 9 in the story. So we have two young boys prominently featured only one episode apart. Both are born without a parent. Anakin by the will of the Force with only a mother, and Boba by cloning technology with only a father. From birth, they're balanced mirrors of each other. Anakin grows up on the desolate deserts of Tatooine, seeing only sand, while Boba grows up on the stormy, rain-swept planet Kamino, seeing only water. They both grew up as prisoners of a sort, with Anakin being a literal slave to Watto and Boba being an experimental project of the cloners, both rarely able to leave their compound and desperately dreaming of exploring the galaxy. Both of them practice and become excellent pilots to pursue their dream. And both had an uncanny ability for space combat, with Anakin using his Force-sensitive reflexes and intuition, while Boba uses his genetic disposition and experience. They even both had stand-in figures for their missing parents, like Zam being Boba's mother figure and Qui-Gon being Anakin's father figure, both to tragically die when the boys were still young, while the boys were not present to watch, not giving the boys a chance to even say goodbye. While Anakin's relationship with Qui-Gon is shown explicitly in the movies, Boba's relationship with Zam is only shown really in the expanded universe, like the Boba Fett book series. These books are some of my favorite Star Wars stories ever written, and I highly recommend them for how much depth they add to young Boba's character, and how it shows his transition to bounty hunter step by step between episodes 2 and 4. The Clone Wars arc about Boba Fett trying to get revenge on Mace Windu is actually a very watered down version compared to the original books, so I definitely recommend you go check it out sometime. But even in this, Anakin is still similar, having much of his development happen off-screen with a really well-written book series to fill in the gaps of his youth. While young Boba's story is told through the Boba Fett series, young Anakin's story is told through Jedi Quest. Both are equally good, and I'll have to make other videos on my favorite Star Wars books someday. But the key here is that Anakin and Boba both grew up in similar parallel environments, facing many of the same struggles, but they go along completely different paths, until they meet up at the end. Both even end up drafted into the Clone Wars, with Anakin as a Jedi General and, from the books, Boba doing stints in both the Clone Army and Separatist Army before finally becoming a bounty hunter. And both the boys were brought into all of this by Darth Sidious's scheming in the background. Sidious's blockade of Naboo brings Qui-Gon to Tatooine, while Sidious's plot for the Clone Wars creates Boba Fett's very existence. Then, Anakin falls without discipline as he struggles growing up with no real father figure. The closest he can find to a father figure is Palpatine, who's only really manipulating Anakin for his own means. And similarly, Boba falls without care as he struggles growing up with no real mother figure. The closest he can find to a mother is Aurra Sing, the bounty hunter from the Clone Wars and Boba Fett books, who also manipulates and betrays Boba for her own purposes. The boys also both lose the parents they do have, with Anakin's mother killed by Tusken Raiders dying right in front of him, and Boba Fett's father killed by Mace Windu, also dying right in front of him. And on that point, Boba Fett is not the only one losing a father figure to Windu. Anakin is faced with a similar situation when Mace fights Palpatine, although Anakin does what Boba never manages to, defending his corrupt father figure and getting immediate revenge on the Jedi. Anakin and Boba had grudges against Mace Windu and they both tried to kill him, but only Anakin succeeded. Although it's virtually impossible for Boba to have really learned the details of that in his relationship to Darth Vader, it's another layer of dramatic irony for the audience watching Boba and Vader's mutual respect, and it makes their connection deeper. In the end, they both go from innocent young boys caring for their parents and wanting to do good, to scarred, battle-hardened warriors in full body armor hunting down enemies of the Empire. Which brings us to a discussion of how Anakin and Boba's connections affect the themes of Star Wars. One of the core themes of the Skywalker saga is how someone as sweet and innocent as young Anakin can become corrupted into a terrifying evil without the proper support from society. If Anakin's mom had lived, if he had grown up with a stable father figure and not been a slave, and lived in a society or organization that had genuinely cared for his personal well-being and given him the freedom to live his life, and tried to help him, he probably would have ended up as good as Luke. This is exactly why Anakin is so moved by Luke's unshakable goodness in the end, and also why Luke's portrayal in The Last Jedi doesn't make any sense, but that's a topic I've already covered in another video. Click the tag or the description if you want to watch it. And Boba has a similar story, where if Jango had survived, if he had a stable mother figure, and if he had been given the freedom to pursue his own life and the support from society he needed, he wouldn't have become a criminal on the streets, and I'm sure he would have ended up much more like Han Solo. So, if they both have similar stories, but Anakin's is far more detailed in the movies, then why include Boba Fett at all? You might think that thematically it seems repetitive to have a minor character mirroring the main story of the main character, but it's actually a pretty powerful technique, even when the audience doesn't consciously realize it. Even when the movie's creator doesn't consciously realize it. And yes, I know that episodes 4 through 6 were made before 1, 2, and 3, but I'd like to look at Star Wars as a chronological whole 1 through 6 because that's how I recommend watching it to get the greatest depth. By showing Boba Fett and Anakin on similar paths with similar results, the differences get emphasized in ways that teach us about our main character, Anakin Skywalker. Despite starting on their different yet strangely parallel paths as a Jedi and a bounty hunter, the two finally meet in the movies face to face in The Empire Strikes Back. It's clear from their conversation that they have some history, and that they respect each other for their skills. Neither one knows how similar their paths to this place have really been. Boba doesn't know of Anakin's fight with Mace Windu, and neither knows just how much they really have in common from a young age, but the audience does. Finally seeing these two in their full body armor face to face, so detached from the sweet innocent young boys they once were, immediately puts into perspective just how dark the galaxy and their own lives have become. It's a moment that shows how Anakin, the chosen one, isn't the only victim. The galaxy and its lack of support does this to everyone and anyone. It's a much wider experience than you would think. And what happens immediately following this scene? Vader goes to hunt down his good guy foil, Luke, while Boba goes to hunt down his good guy foil, Han. Both men have grown up to be so different and so much more broken than they began as children, to the point of even hunting down the people most similar to them who happen to choose a better path. At this moment, there's a choice, and in The Empire Strikes Back, both of them choose the dark side. Boba freezes Han in carbonite and takes him to Jabba. Vader tries freezing Luke in carbonite and tries taking him to the Emperor. But Luke uses his skills and courage to escape, granting Vader one more chance that Boba never got. In The Return of the Jedi, Boba Fett takes Han back to Jabba, then tries to fight with Han, and gets thrown into the Sarlacc pit as a moral punishment. Vader similarly takes Luke to the Emperor and fights with him, getting defeated by Luke and knocked to the ground and losing his arm again as moral punishment. But Vader isn't lost here. Vader isn't lost because Luke gives him another chance. One last chance to take his life back and join the light side. One last chance to avoid the fate of Boba Fett. To avoid becoming a minor villain. A minor obstacle to the heroes. One last chance to become the main hero. To be the chosen one. And Vader takes it, throwing the Emperor down a shaft in the second Death Star to end the Emperor, the Sith, and the pain that Vader caused the galaxy. Finally, at least in the eyes of his light side foil, Vader chooses to redeem himself. And that's how Boba Fett's story as a minor character mirroring Anakin actually enhances Vader's story. Boba shows the unceremonious end of the path that Vader was on. And he shows us the power in Vader actively choosing not to continue down that same path. But then again, there was still more of Boba Fett in the expanded universe, and Disney has released their own new Boba Fett series since then too. So the question becomes, does Boba's return undermine his role as the mirror to Anakin Skywalker? I would argue no, it doesn't. Boba Fett in episodes 1 through 6 is a minor background character who serves as the dark mirror to Anakin's journey. The stories after Return of the Jedi, whether they're from Disney or the expanded universe, do one thing for him. They leave his role as a minor character mirror to Vader dead, and the stories resurrect Boba as a main character in his own right, finally rising to take his own second chance at redeeming the lost path that he was on for so many years. And as the expanded universe continues to grow, and as Disney keeps making more Boba Fett stories, and as the fans take their own look at his new journey, the resurrection of Boba continues to take on a life and a story of its own, whichever post-Return of the Jedi stories are your favorite. But what about behind the scenes? I said I would talk about where some of these connections come from and why they're in the story, so let's discuss that now. First things first, Star Wars was written in the order 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, with no solid, guiding, overarching plan across them. The early drafts changed so much between each release that you can't even reasonably argue much of it was planned at all. The plans just never held and things were always changing. When The Empire Strikes Back was made, Boba Fett was not known to have such a close mirroring history with Anakin Skywalker. Mace Windu, Kamino, Jango, Shmi, and the Clone Wars didn't even really exist yet. But Boba was still a mirror to Darth Vader and still a foil to Han Solo. Now that Han Solo was solidly a good guy and Vader needed to focus more on Luke, Star Wars needed a new, intimidating, masked, cool villain to oppose Han, Leia, and Chewbacca directly. And that was Boba Fett. Boba's role as a mirror to Vader was well established by The Empire Strikes Back. And later, young Boba was well established as a mirror to Anakin in Attack of the Clones. But the oddball out here is Return of the Jedi. Boba Fett was originally kind of a one-off character for The Empire Strikes Back, based on special advanced Stormtrooper action figures. But thanks to his great character moments and the legendary costume design, he accidentally became a cultural icon that the fans love. However, being a staunch defender of good guy heroism in fantasy, George Lucas didn't like how Boba Fett's villainous cool factor overshadowed Han, Luke, Leia, and Chewbacca. George Lucas also had struggles figuring out how to incorporate Boba into the overall story while still keeping the focus on Luke and Vader's relationship. So, in the end, Boba Fett was unceremoniously dumped into the Sarlacc pit right away, just to get him out of the story and also to reduce his cool factor. As an editor of Return of the Jedi later said,
"It seemed to me that George was somehow disappointed with who Boba Fett had become. I don't know whether it was the way it was shot, but Boba didn't measure up to some standard George had."
Frustrated with the development of Boba Fett, George Lucas gave up and told the film's production team to, quote, just throw him in the pit. But Lucas would later go on to regret that decision, being relieved when fans and expanded universe authors revived the bounty hunter in their own stories. This is the main reason that George Lucas revisited young Boba Fett and created Jango Fett in the prequel trilogy, to further develop the character and to give him a proper send-off, with a part in the story as big as his popularity with the fans.
In the case of Boba Fett's death, had I known he was going to turn into such a popular character, I probably would have made it a little bit more exciting. Boba Fett was just another one of the minions, another one of the bounty hunters and bad guys. But he became such a favorite of everybody's for having such a small part. He had a very large presence. And now that his history has been told in the first trilogy, it makes it even more of a misstep that we wouldn't make more out of the event of his defeat. Because most people don't believe he died anyway. I had contemplated putting that extra shot in where he climbs out of the hole, but, I figure it doesn't quite fit in the end.
Acting-wise and everything, it was very good to have Tam there because he'd worked the character out, and they were supposed to be the same person, more or less.
This means that Boba's death was not planned at all to be a warning of Vader's possible fate. Boba's death was mainly just an accident of filmmaking, which is why he was so easily resurrected by other creators and fans, similar to Darth Maul. But despite being unintentional, what matters most is the impact on the story. And Boba's fall to the Sarlacc at the end of Return of the Jedi sets a tone for the rest of the movie, that main villains can die at any time, and that there will be major consequences in this finale. Despite being unintentional, Return of the Jedi accidentally used Boba Fett to heighten the tension of its final act with Vader. So that's the story of how Anakin and Boba Fett accidentally became complementary characters. But if you want to check out more analysis on how much screen time characters in Star Wars have, or the deep themes of Anakin's fall, click on one of the videos on screen now. And thanks for watching. May the Force be with you.